morning and welcome to the Full Scottish on this Sunday, the 14th of July. I'm Douglas MacKenzie and we'll bring you news stories from Scotland and around the world. And with me are two guests to discuss the headlines. This being the week of the 29th anniversary of the massacre at Srebrenica, we had hoped to have Ferrer Gotić from Bosnia with us today, but unfortunately she couldn't make it in the last minute. But well represented here. First of all, I have Maureen Watt, who most of you will know, but former MSP for Aberdeen South and former Minister in the Scottish Government, managing various portfolios in health and women's health, and Minister in education also. Simon Barrow is Director of the Politics, Ethics and Beliefs think tank Ecclesia, and editor and author of 5 books on Scottish politics, most recently A Better Nation, The Challenges of Scottish Independence. Well, as you know, we normally start with our Ukraine update, but there is one story which has dominated the overnight headlines, and that's the Trump rally shooting. There's been an assassination attempt on Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunman, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, was shot dead at the scene. Trump appeared to have been hit on his ear, and one member of the audience has been killed. Now, I'll come to the guest, to you, Maureen, first of all. The BBC covered this with a headline from Simon Zurcher saying a spray of bullets shatters a nation's illusion of security. Now, of course, there is shock, but shock as in shock horror. Surely this could not have been a surprise in a country where there have been shootings at concerts, at schools, at shopping malls, and with the polarized nature of debate in the run-up to the US election. What are your thoughts on it and the repercussions of it?
Well, first of all, shock, even although I'm old enough to remember assassinations attempts, which were, of course, successful on John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert, and the attempt on the life of Ronald Reagan. But nevertheless, it comes as quite a shock. I mean, I did stay up till about 2 o'clock in the morning watching it actually on Sky News. And I was horrified that the prisoner let guests get away with the fact that it was all of the Democrats' fault without any rebuttal from her whatsoever. It was absolutely awful. And, you know, there are still lots of stories coming out on this, obviously. We don't know the full facts yet and what actually is the case. I mean, I heard that this Thomas Matthew Crooks was in fact a member of the Republican Party. So that kind of lays to bed the lie that it was all about the Democrats. But nevertheless, it has fired up so many Republicans that it is going to put a whole new angle on this upcoming US elections, and I fear that it will not be focusing obviously on the issues, including gun control, which should dominate the political discourse on this. It'll be interesting to see whether Donald Trump now argues for gun control, for example. That would be a real change and a real grown-up politician. But clearly this will dominate the news agenda for many days to come.
Thank you. Yeah, you were saying that they were instantly blaming the Democrats. I'm sure everyone will jump on that bandwagon because I saw some Russian telegram channels this morning saying, oh, very difficult shot. He probably trained by the Azov Brigade in Ukraine. So there's going to be all sorts of conspiracy nonsense swirling around for quite a long time. Simon, what's your take on it and view for the future
Well,
in
obviously,
American politics?
I agree with the comments that Maureen has made more generally. Yes, we've seen already attempts by the extreme MAGA wing of the Republican Party and Donald Trump supporters to try to politicize this, to somehow make it about Biden and the Democrats, referring to a speech he made on the 8th of July, where he talked about, focusing and targeting Donald Trump in political terms. And that language has instantly been, and I checked the word I'm about to use, weaponized, but that is a word that we're using in politics. The sort of violent rhetoric within politics has increased. However, the particular danger of this situation, and it's utterly appalling that anyone should, attempt to kill anybody in political terms. That ought not even, we shouldn't even have to say that, but we do have to say that. But it isn't a general increase in violent rhetoric in the United States. It's actually particularly related, unfortunately, to Donald Trump and his supporters. And it's going to be extremely important to remember the facts in relation to this, because not only are we seeing an increase in violent rhetoric, but we're also seeing increasingly opinion dislocated from any attempt to locate facts or to recognize truth. But, only very recently, Donald Trump tried to claim that the FBI and that Joe Biden effectively were involved in a kind of assassination plot against him as a result of a document, a standard document that was issued by the FBI when they searched for classified documents at Mar-a-Lago back in 2022, when incidentally he wasn't even there. And he's falsely claimed that this was an attempted assassination attempt. As a result of that, more and more threats have been issued against judges, against people involved in the legal cases in which he's involved. And let's not forget that he's a convicted felon, that he's a person who's been convicted of sexual assault and of rape, so of violence himself and so on. So he has time and time again attempted to ratchet up this violent rhetoric. And of course, we can't forget the 6th of January 2021. Now, the reason that this must be stressed is that it isn't just, as I say, a generalized increase in the climate of violence. It's coming very heavily from one side. That doesn't in any way mitigate or excuse what this young man did. We don't, as Maureen said, know exactly why this happened and so on. It's utterly, utterly appalling. But we mustn't lose focus on where the problem is coming from. And of course, gun violence, around about 100 people, more than 100 people a day die in the United States. Every time that happens, the National Rifle Association, which Donald Trump is heavily associated and invested with, tries to dismiss that and actually tells people there should be more guns and so on. Trump himself has been quite mocking towards other acts of violence that have taken place. We can remember in 2011, the Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords received serious brain injury as a result of an assassination attempt. This isn't something new in American politics, but it's absolutely clear that we have to dial in a different direction.
Thank you, and thank you. Sorry, Maureen,
yeah, I was just going to say, it was really strange that, having fallen to the floor like you're trained to do, that when he got up, he said something like fight, fight, fight again to his supporters. I mean, I think anybody else would have been, totally shocked and a bit humbled by that happening. But he was so belligerent still. I thought it was quite shocking.
Well, I think you might be rather annoyed at somebody taking a shot at you, but hard to explain the reactions. But thank you both very much, and thank you, Simon, also for mentioning Gabby Gifford, who seems to be forgotten in most of the news reports that I saw. So we move on from there to our normal Ukraine update on this day 872 since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia launched a double-tap missile attack on a small town near Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, killing 2 people, an emergency services official and a police officer, officials said. Officials also reported 4 dead in a series of attacks in Donetsk region in the southeast and 2 more in southern Kherson region. Prosecutors said the mid-afternoon missile attack targeted the railway station in Gotić, southwest of Kharkiv. After rescue teams arrived, a second missile hit the area. 25 people were injured in the incidents, including 2 children. Interior Minister Igor Klimenko said that the head of the Kharkiv District Emergency Services was killed, along with a police officer from a rapid reaction unit. Among the injured were 3 emergency workers, a policeman, and about 20 civilians. The Kremlin has warned that the stationing of long-range US missiles in Germany could make European capitals targets for Russian missiles in a repeat of Cold War-style confrontation. The US announced during the week's NATO summit that it would periodically station long-range weapons, including Tomahawk cruise missiles, in Germany from 2026 as a deterrent. Russia had already criticized the move and accused Washington of taking a step towards a new Cold War and of directly participating in the conflict in Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky has played down US President Joe Biden's recent gaffe at a NATO summit, where he introduced the Ukrainian leader as Russian President Putin, saying it was a mistake that could now be forgotten. Zelensky stopped in Ireland to visit Irish Taoiseach Simon Harris on his way back from the summit in Washington. Zelensky's meeting with Harris is expected to cement Ireland's support for Ukraine's bid towards European Union membership. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko says tensions had subsided at his country's border with Ukraine, and extra troops deployed there were being sent back to their bases. Belarus's defense ministry said late last month that it was reinforcing its border after a security incident and in response to a Ukrainian troop buildup. A spokesperson for Ukraine's border guards, in a statement posted online, dismissed the notion of an extra deployment. European leaders will meet at the upcoming European Political Community, EPC, to discuss Ukraine and the arc of conflict and instability threatening Europe's borders. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer warned that Europe is at the forefront of some of the greatest challenges of our time, highlighting Russia's barbaric war that continues to reverberate across our continent. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to travel to the UK next week to address European leaders at the EPC. Germany said it won't be intimidated over its support for Ukraine after reports of an alleged assassination attempt on the head of a leading defense company this week. CNN reported that US intelligence services had foiled a plot to kill Armin Papager, the CEO of Rheinmetall, which has provided large amounts of armaments to Ukraine. German Interior Ministry spokesman Maximilian Kohl declined to comment on the reports, but said Germany takes the significantly increased threat from Russian aggression very seriously. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said such reports cannot be taken seriously. Maury, turning to you first. These were new horrors of attacks on civilians in Ukraine, but of course they're all overshadowed this week by the attack on the Children's Cancer Hospital in Kyiv. Is this a sign that Putin and the Russian military feel they can do anything, that there will be no significant response?
Yes, I think it is. I think after his election return, and knowing that the West have been slow in providing the correct armaments to Ukraine, that he is very emboldened. And I mean, the man is just an absolute horror. He has no conscience whatsoever. He is absolutely obsessed with expanding Russia's borders and recreating the old Soviet Union, and Ukraine is just his first target, which is why it's so important that the West support Ukraine in every way that they can. I mean, I hadn't heard about the alleged attack or attempt of someone in Germany, but that is even more worrying. I mean, there is absolutely, and also as we've heard this week, he has his sights on Yushchenko's wife Yulia. So he is just completely out of control, and it's, the NATO summit has been overshadowed by what happened yesterday afternoon in the States, but I think that was a good conference where NATO members were united in their opposition to Putin, and showing that they were prepared to support Ukraine in any way that they need.
Thank you. Simon, would you like to pick up on any of the points from the news story or from what Maureen has been saying?
Well, again, it's a sickening situation. It feels almost optimistic to say that, attacks on children's hospitals are something that shouldn't be happening and so on, of course. But this is a conflict happening at the heart of Europe, and it raises very severe questions about the future of security policy in Europe and indeed internationally. Ukraine is part of Putin's design for reasserting a greater Russia. He himself came to power as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emergence of gangster capitalism, which unfortunately was supported by a lot of us in the West, the oligarchs who rose from that and who switched their support to him. Of course, he has a history back in the KGB as well. There's a whole history of non- and anti-democratic politics for a very, very long time. And now you have someone in power whose entire position is now mortgaged on this appalling invasion of Ukraine and the attempt to suppress Ukraine, the attempt to reincorporate Ukraine into Russia, and so on. It has very deep, violent and dangerous roots, but also in terms of the future, it's extremely dangerous for the security, not just of Europe, but of the world. The possibilities and the dangers of nuclear escalation with the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons is terribly frightening, actually, and something that we have to avoid and contain. And I think the dilemma could be seen in the NATO summit. NATO has again established its position in relation to deterrence against aggression, but that clearly hasn't worked right at the heart of Europe. Putin has to be contained in every way possible. He is clearly trying to fight this war as a war of attrition, hoping eventually that Ukraine will be ground down, that international support will waver, and so on, so that he can triumph. He's not going to triumph. That's extremely important. But there's probably not going to be, a complete and unambiguous result to this conflict. I say conflict; it's an invasion. Ukraine is simply trying to defend itself. There's going to have to be a political solution. The politics has kind of ground to a halt. There have been a number of initiatives, for example, the Vatican initiative towards, some kind of settlement there. At the moment, we're in gridlock on the one hand, and on the other hand, it appears that the search for a total victory against Putin is going to be very difficult to achieve. These are really serious questions about how we handle defense, how we handle security, how we handle dictatorships, the growth of the far right, which Putin is also part of, and so on. And anyone who comes and sort of says, oh, there's a straightforward solution to this, is really not facing the tragedy, the difficulty and the horror of that situation.
Just staying, Simon, with your point there on a political settlement. I mean, there are two things there. You mentioned the NATO conference, as did Maureen, and in the headlines I mentioned the EPC meeting. Now, the whole tenor of Western European politics has been about not escalating, and you spoke about the dangers of tactical nuclear weapons. But after all, Putin is someone who has escalated to using chemical weapons in Britain on at least two occasions. Yet Ukraine is told it can't have weapons which can strike into Russia, where the bombers are flying from, which are firing the missiles on their hospitals and civilians. Is there a political way out? And again, the Ukrainians would say, well, yes, we had the Minsk agreement, we had the Budapest memorandum,
Yeah.
we've had all these agreements which Russia has signed up to, but has never kept to.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, you pointed out about the use of chemicals, and of course, targeted assassination is also something that Putin has used, and so on. He's made threats about the possible use of nuclear weapons. We also have, of course, a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, and the incredible dangers of that being hit and of a disaster there, and so on. The difficulty is that there are a number of things that people want to achieve almost simultaneously. The containment of Putin, the freedom of Ukraine, the avoidance of the use of nuclear weapons, the avoidance of the use of escalation, and so on. And there isn't a sort of simple, direct path for achieving all of those things at the same time. In terms of the politics, anyway, from a Ukrainian point of view, I absolutely understand why talk about a political solution will instantly sound like talk about granting something to Putin. And of course, people in Ukraine and President Zelensky want Putin to gain absolutely nothing. They want the complete removal of Russia from Ukraine and total victory. And I absolutely understand that. That's not the way that things happen in most wars and most conflicts. We live in the shadow of the Second World War, which appears to us from our perspective as a complete and outright victory for one side. That's not how most wars end. There is probably going to be a difficult and messy solution, because the containment of Putin and the hope that he will eventually be removed and that things will shift in Russia is not going to be a quick process. We live in an age where we expect and really seek instant and quick solutions. And there often aren't ones. And the real horror of this situation is that, thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Ukraine could continue to die as a result of this, unless we can begin to dial up politics, achieve containment, and dial down militarism. And when you're dealing with someone like Putin, of course, that's incredibly difficult. But we have to be able to talk about that. We can't simply accept a situation in which weapons are being pumped in on both sides, China and North Korea also supporting Russia and so on, and there is no political initiative or no possibility of a move forward in that direction. So we have to begin to talk about that. But no one can sit around this table or any other table and say, oh yes, here's the solution. We know what needs to be achieved. We know the containment and eventually the removal of Putin, which will have to happen within Russia, needs to happen. We know that Ukraine must be preserved. We know escalation must be stopped. All of those factors all need to be taken into the political discussion as to how you begin to move towards those being actual live possibilities.
Thank you, Simon. I dare say that we will speak about Ukraine again when we move on to discuss genocide. But first of all, the news from Gaza this week. At this point, at least 38,443 Palestinians have been killed and 88,481 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October. In the latest attack on Gaza, an Israeli strike on a refugee camp killed 90 people and injured 289. The strike was targeted at killing a Hamas military leader. So, Maureen, unconscionable collateral damage or genocide?
Yes, and I don't think they know yet if they managed to get the Hamas leader that they were after. But again, here we have a horrible person in Netanyahu, totally devoid of any care about the number of civilians that are killed in Gaza in his attempt to eradicate Hamas. Excuse me, he is in fact just eradicating Gaza. The total obliteration of Gaza is his aim. And again, human life doesn't seem to mean anything to too many political leaders anymore. And I just kind of I'm so disgusted with what's happening in the world. I mean, I just think, oh my goodness, how on earth do we totally reverse the direction that politics is taking in so many countries. And you do, in your darkest hours, think that this is actually going to lead to so many conflicts coming together to have a third world conflagration. And, Simon was saying that there's no easy answer in Ukraine. And so many countries have been trying to, in the Middle East itself, where I think the solution must come, to try and get a resolution in the Israel-Gaza conflict. And yet it just seems to be taking so long to even get any points of agreement, to even get a permanent ceasefire. It's just incorrigible that in the 21st century we're living with so many really bad conflicts in the world.
Thank you, Maureen, for a depressing, if realistic, worldview there. Simon, I'm not going to ask you how we solve the Middle East conflict. Many people have been asked that, but what is the way forward?
Well, I mean, clearly the way forward, unambiguously, is that there needs to be a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, what started out after the horrific events of the 7th of October and, the actions of Hamas, but which, of course, goes back far further than that. It's a whole history of 75 years of occupation and violence and Gaza basically being a prison camp, has been just ceaseless slaughter. I mean, the statistics at the moment, through the UN Coordination Office, are something like 38,000 people have died as a result of the continual Israeli attacks on Gaza. But as the Lancet report recently indicated, there could be as many as 186,000 people who've actually been killed as a result of this conflict so far. The figures could be much, much higher. Up to 8% of the entire population. An entire population has been displaced. People have been kettled into safe areas and then bombed and attacked when they put in safe areas. Refugee camps have been attacked. 35% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. Pretty well all the university and college buildings have been destroyed. Hospitals, there are no functioning hospitals that haven't been attacked and so on. This is clearly not self-defense. This is mass assault, and the word genocide is one that's now being applied as a result of the South African case to the International Court, now being supported by others, including, for example, Spain. And this is happening, every single day, every single hour, right in front of our eyes. And much of the international community is still refusing to accept those facts. I'm very glad that the Scottish Government is amongst those who've called for a permanent ceasefire, who are doing what they can to offer humanitarian support and so on. But at the moment, the United States and the United Kingdom government are still arming Israel. And again, Netanyahu is trying to use this attempt really to displace an entire population and to replace it. I mean, members of the Israeli government have talked about there being no one innocent in Gaza, about the need to clear the entire area and so on. This is completely unambiguous in those terms when you look at the weight of evidence there. And this raises very serious issues for the issue of genocide that we'll come to. But it also raises issues about the United States and the United Kingdom must stop, and others must stop supplying weapons to Israel. And we have to recognise that Netanyahu, very sadly, again, is a kind of product of a whole failed political situation around Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East. He himself, of course, at one point was encouraging the emergence of Hamas because he wanted to prevent the possibility of a two-state solution. He wanted to defeat politically Fatah, who were seen as the moderate option there. So it feels like it's the extremists weaponizing a situation who've managed to achieve this. But clearly, the slaughter has to be stopped, and that's an absolute priority.
Thank you. A question on that to you, Maureen. As a politician, a former politician, who understands the art of the possible, is there really any country in the world other than the United States who can put sufficient pressure on Israel to change course and to look at peace?
I think the answer to that is probably not, because they rely on the United States so much for aid, and for for aid that keeps them going. But obviously, the president of the United States has so much on his in tray that you don't know where Israel is in the uh, in the pecking order, so to speak. But I did listen to Biden at his press conference the other day, and he's quite right to say there is so much that he has still to do. He needs to finish the job, and I totally agree with him on that. And Israel is obviously one of them too, but it does require other countries who speak to United States, like at the NATO conference, to stress the urgency of this because of the genocide that is happening in Gaza, and hopefully something will. I suppose I'm hoping against hope, actually, because they're in an election situation in the United States, and I suppose nothing too controversial is going to happen during that period. So maybe we are in a stalemate situation, and Netanyahu will be able to continue as he said he was going to do until December this year. So it's actually quite depressing, and doesn't seem to be much hope in this area.
It's interesting that you say that other countries can talk to the United States about it, because talking to Israel seems to have had no effect. I mean, Lord Cameron, when he was Foreign Secretary, was completely ignored. Annalena Baerbock, the German Foreign Minister, was slightly more politely ignored. So you think the way is for other countries to pressure the United States into.
Yeah, but maybe thinking about it, actually, just here as we're talking about it's maybe a bit of a cop out, because I mean the UK was largely responsible, well, almost totally responsible for the current situation in the Middle East, and they just seem to forget that they created the situation in the first place. I've been reading a book I think it's called The Dividing Line, and it just details how we got to this situation in that part of the Middle East. So, maybe it's time that the UK did step up to the plate and take responsibility for it, and maybe lead on it, because perhaps we expect too much of the United States.
Okay, thank you.
I completely agree with that, and I mean, I think that the UK has always claimed a special relationship with the United States. Now is definitely the time to press that. I mean, it's exaggerated and mistaken in many ways. Maureen is absolutely right, of course. What the tragedy of the situation post-war and post the horrific situation of the Holocaust was an attempted kind of colonial solution to a problem which has gone desperately wrong. We now have Israelis and Palestinians, who are two deeply wounded peoples, who are not able, just at the human level, very often to look at each other and sort of recognize their own wounds and the wounds of the other, if you like. There's a very human dimension to this. But, what has happened with Israel's policy against Gaza, the occupation of Palestinian territories, collective punishment, it's absolutely shocking. And when we say never again, following the events of the Second World War, that must mean anywhere in the world, and it must also apply to the State of Israel. And I think this morning particularly of my incredibly brave Jewish friends, including people who are Holocaust survivors, and people they know who are families of Holocaust survivors, who have been incredibly brave in speaking out against this and saying this is not being done in our name. This must be stopped. Yes, the United States is absolutely key to this. If it could turn off the military pipeline, it would change the situation very, very substantially. But as Maureen said, the situation has to be in the Middle East itself, with the people living there. It can't be imposed from the outside. We have to learn from the tragic history of this in the past.
Thank you both. We talked about potential genocide in Israel and also many allegations of it in Russian actions in Ukraine. One place where genocide cannot be denied was Srebrenica. On the 11th of July 1995, the UN protected safe haven of Srebrenica was overrun by Ratko Mladic and the Serbian army. They separated the women, young children, and pensioners and put them on buses to Tuzla before embarking on an orgy of murder, killing 8,372 men and boys in the days following the UN surrender. This year, the UN declared the 11th of July the International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the Srebrenica genocide. So it has been marked. Maureen, turning to you first. Simon said, we said after the Second World War, never again. I seem to remember hearing never again after Srebrenica. What are your memories of that time and the international view on it?
Yeah, it was quite, it was horrible to watch at the time and horrible to recall the whole thing. And I'm so pleased that Linda Graham of Broadcasting Scotland is someone who cares so deeply about this and, has been to the area many times. And I'm sorry that Mika isn't here to talk more personally about that this morning. I'm just kind of lost for words, actually, that people don't learn, politicians don't learn, that they don't learn from history ever. I mean, is it egos? What is it that drives people to think that killing fellow human beings is okay? I mean, that's basically what they think, that life is not precious. It's not, well, I hate to use the word sacred because that, got religious connotations, but you know what I mean, that life means so little to so many people of power. For what? In the end, for what? I mean, surely we're past the era, although we don't see it in Ukraine, of people wanting to increase territory. For goodness sake, Putin isn't using all of Russia to benefit the people of Russia, but yet he wants to expand territory. And I mean, in Srebrenica, it's about people of different nationalities, I suppose, or that can't live together. I mean, wherever you're God, we're all God's people. So why can't we just learn to get on, basically?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, why do politicians find life? Many politicians find life worthless. I think is it not more that certain definitions of people, their life is worthless, not the ruling sect, but the people that they see as unworthy, below them, as it was in the Holocaust, as it was with the Bosniaks in Bosnia. Simon, what's your take on Srebrenica? And really, I'm also interested, there was so little coverage of it. This declaration by the UN this year that they would have an International Day of Reflection every year, ignored by the BBC as far as I can see, and very little reported.
Yes, I mean, there's so much happening in the world at the moment that the danger is that things come into focus and other things completely disappear. Incidentally, therefore, let's mention that one of the worst things happening in the world at the moment is what's happening in Sudan. This is a mass crisis in which thousands are dying and being displaced, and so on. And we're really not talking about that at all. But you're right. Srebrenica was the day was pretty well ignored. It's important to state that the International Court of Justice in 2007 was very clear that this was an attempted genocide. Around 8,000 Muslims were killed. between 23 and 30,000 men, women, and children were, of course, forcibly removed. That was also part of the background. And this happened in a place that was supposed to be a UN protected zone. And in fact, back in 2007, the government in the Netherlands had to resign because they had to acknowledge that they had failed on a number of occasions to prevent deaths as part of the process that was supposed to protect people in that area. So there are a huge number of lessons that need to be learned from the specifics of that, including the question I think we're going to go and look at, which is, genocide prevention and protections to prevent genocide and actions in relation to that. So those are some of the key things that need to be learned. But as you've said, Douglas, memory is really, really important. And at the moment, we live in a digital age in which we're flooded with information, but perspective is lost, particular historical memory is lost, events are taken out of context so that we begin to lose a sense of their real importance and how they affect the decisions that we have to make now. And this is one case where we must not forget. We must not only remember, but we must examine and we must look at lessons that need to be learned in practical terms, not just political hand-wringing and saying, oh yes, lessons must be learned, but actually what difference in policy, what difference in security and defence policy and protection policy and so on must be implemented as a result of these situations that we have to go on recognising are vital, not just for the historical record, but for the way that we conduct ourselves going into the future.
Thank you. I'd like to move on now to genocide more widely. Obviously, genocide has been happening since time immemorial, long before the word genocide was defined by Raphael Lemkin, and the UN adopted the Genocide Convention in 1948, but it's still happening today. The question, why is it so hard for states to accept genocide and act? I know part of the answer to that is that they have a duty to, but for example, with Srebrenica, Serbia still refuses to recognize it as genocide and has called it horrible crimes. I don't know if either of you can enlighten me also on the UN convention is pretty clear when you read it, but looking, for example, at the charge sheet for Milosevic when he was before The Hague, Simon was talking there about deportation, removal of people from their homes as being genocide, which is what I understand as well. But there were so many incidents of that in his charge sheet where it was classified as crimes against humanity or actions against the laws and customs of war. So I wonder, in the light of understanding genocide, if you can give some clarity as to which is which and why it's important that genocide is recognized. So I'll come to you first, Simon. You were itching in the back.
Well, no, I mean, because you're raising really, really important issues. I mean, of course, genocide is a crime against humanity. So, these definitions overlap with each other. But in terms of the present convention, genocide means a range of acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. And those include killing members of the group, obviously, causing serious bodily or mental harm to people, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, what we often call collective punishment, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring or removing people, acts of terror against civilian populations and so on. And I think one of the very important things is that these definitions have to be applied without fear or favour. I mean, it's a tragic reality. You've talked about the denial of the genocide, the Bosnian genocide, and so on. The Israeli ambassador to Belgrade said that it wasn't a genocide. The Simon Wiesenthal Centre said it wasn't a genocide because there's some kind of competition between people as to who has the right to this kind of level of victimhood. That's entirely wrong. whoever is targeted and killed deliberately to try and remove, displace, or eliminate them, we need to acknowledge as genocide. And I mean, this goes right back to 1915 to 1917, the Armenian genocide under the end of the Ottoman Empire. Again, up to 1.5 million people killed there. To this day, Turkey still denies that that's a genocide. So recognition without fear or favour is absolutely crucial. But two other factors are crucial. First of all, the situation of our international institutions. In an increasingly globalised world, we need international institutions which have sanction and legitimacy and recognition. And actually, our international institutions, including the International Court, are effectively being undermined at the moment by the refusal of that recognition. And then secondly, the ability to actually implement positive measures of prevention in situations where there is a severe danger of genocide taking place, or mass slaughter, or crimes against humanity. All of these things, they all need to be brought together. But obviously genocide is the absolute pinpoint of that. So actually finding ways of strengthening and widening the capacity of our international institutions is one of the key political tasks at the moment, and one of the most difficult.
Thanks. Maureen, if I can pick up on what Simon was saying there, recognition and the effectiveness of the international organisations. You spoke about Linda Graham's trips to Bosnia. One of the things from our report in 2002 from Srebrenica was a lady saying that all the top brass from around the world have come to mark the memorial, but at that time Milosevic, Karadzic, and General Masic were all still at liberty. Unusually, they all came in front of The Hague, which I'm sure gave some sort of closure to many people in Bosnia. How important do you think that is? And in light of genocide which is going on at the moment in Ukraine and in Gaza, is it likely that at some time we will see Putin or Netanyahu in front of The Hague?
Well, I sincerely hope so, but I couldn't put it any better than Simon has in what he said. I mean, the word that came to my mind talking about this was sanctions and the effectiveness of sanctions. I mean, we can have conventions and articles in conventions that are agreed with a great flurry, but it's the follow-up that never seems to happen and be put in place so that there is a deterrent, if you like. And the deterrent must be that these people are tried. I'm just trying to think why they have to come to The Hague all the time. Couldn't we just have it in their countries where the people can see at close hand what happens to people who commit such a genocide, so that they can see that justice is really done on their doorstep? I mean, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get Putin in any country where he could be arrested, for example. And perhaps it's going to be the same with Netanyahu. But they're at the top of governments that obviously presumably sanction what the leaders does, especially in Israel, for example, because we have seen support for Netanyahu erode in some sectors. So it is really the follow-up from the great words that are spoken in documents that are made up after the Genocide Convention, for example. And Simon is absolutely right that we have to see that people who commit these terrible atrocities are brought to justice. But that you don't get the feeling that is actually what's going to happen in many cases.
Indeed not. Thank you both. Now, to a topic which is perhaps more light-hearted, but some are saying it's not. and that was the front page of the National yesterday. I don't know if you both have seen it, or if our viewers have all seen it, but it was Get Your Revenge Spain, with a bloated England supporter there, and they come and they drink all your beer and they trash your villages. Now's your chance to get your revenge. Probably meant lightheartedly. A lot of people have taken extreme offence to it, not just English people, I hasten to add. And there are people say, well, xenophobia is the first step towards valuing certain sectors of society less, and the end chain of that is genocide, and it's something that the independence movement in Scotland has prided itself on being a civic movement. So, Maureen, your thoughts?
I just thought it was absolutely awful. I mean, whoever thought that that was a good idea needs to really look at themselves, and other people need to, condemn. And I really think, I mean, it must be an editorial board. Did they all think that this was a good idea? I mean, who is it benefiting? Certainly not the independence movement. And it must be utterly, utterly condemned by all of us who believe that independence will be achieved peacefully and democratically. And I mean, that their subscription rate has dropped as a result of that, because they deserve it, is absolutely indefensible.
Okay, thank you. Simon, as a long-term studier of Scottish politics, what's your take on it?
Well, yes, and I should also say I'm, of course, co-founder of the Scottish Football Supporters Association, and I'm an English-born person who's lived in Scotland for 15 years. And so, I have a number of takes on this. I mean, clearly, the cover was just a huge mistake. I think it would be slightly sad to condemn the National completely as a result of this. I think, Laura Webster, the editor, has done a fabulous job over the last couple of years. It's done some really, really good reporting and commentary. I have to declare an interest. I contribute to the National from time to time. This was a huge mistake. Absolutely. It was an attempt at humour which backfired really, really badly. Now, I mean, looking at the situation, tonight's match, I hope the best team wins. I should say that I have a kind of interesting story in relation to this, in that going back to a certain event that many in Scotland want to forget, in 1966. I was about 9 years of age, and I was actually at school, and I had a German friend at school. And it has to be said, the kind of aggression and antipathy around football wasn't the same in those days, but nevertheless, the kid got treated fairly badly. And I was very upset by it. And I went to my parents before the World Cup final and said, I'm really unhappy about this. I'm not sure I want England to win. And I was ordered outside as a result of that. Next year, of course, Scotland played England in 1967 at Wembley, and my boyhood hero Dennis Law was playing. So I ended up supporting Scotland. We ought to be able to take our allegiances in different kinds of places. I'm a strong supporter of Scottish independence. I don't use the word nationalist to describe myself. For me, it's about how you build a better Scotland that's a benefit to ourselves and to the world and so on. I don't think we should get that over caught up with this particular mistake and so on. And as I say, I hope the best team wins tonight. If it is the best team, it'll probably be Spain. If England win, I will congratulate them. I think Gareth Southgate in particular has done very well, and thoroughly decent man. I have to say, as an English person, I've been very unhappy with the kind of 2 world wars, 1 World Cup, the sort of aggressive attempt to assert privilege and superiority, and football caught up with that has made that really very uncomfortable for me in the past. I'm an internationalist. I strongly supported Scotland in the recent Euros. We didn't, unfortunately, manage to get out of the group, but that's a very important thing. So yes, it was a huge misstep. Let's not over-exaggerate it, but let's try and breed a sense of international solidarity through football, as well as rivalry and commitment to the places of our birth and so on. The two can go together, and they need to go together.
Thank you.
I
That's a
think
very
I think people should remember the diplomacy of the Tartan Army and how well they
Yes.
did in representing Scotland, rather than this one headline. But I'm looking forward to an afternoon of evening of sport, and perhaps Spain will triumph on two courts or two pitches.
Yes. Who knows? Good luck to whoever wins, and
Absolutely.
consolation to those who don't.
yeah, to both of you and to anyone else watching. I hope you have a pleasant afternoon and evening of watching the sport. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,000. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you. And thank you again to my guests today, Maureen Watt, and to Simon. Thank you very much indeed for a very interesting conversation. Goodbye to you all, and thank you for watching.